We're sponsored today by NordLayer. NordLayer combines VPN, access control, and threat protection in a single platform. With NordLayer, you can give users secure remote access to internal systems while enforcing granular control over who accesses what, from where, on which device. Find out more at nordlayer.com/protector. And here's an exclusive offer for Packet Protector listeners. Get up to 22% off NordLayer yearly plans, plus get an additional 10% off with the coupon code PROTECTOR-10. Try it risk-free with a 14-day money-back guarantee at nordlayer.com/protector.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Jennifer J.J. Minnelli here with Drew Connery-Murray, and we also have Gerald Combs. Gerald is the CFO of the Wireshark Foundation, who, of course, makes Wireshark, and also director of open source projects at Sysdig, which we're going to talk about. So we're actually having Gerald on today to talk about something new from Wireshark, which is Stratoshark.
Yeah, Stratoshark is a new tool for analyzing system calls. So just as Wireshark lets you look at packet captures, Stratoshark lets you look at system calls that programs have made on a device. And there's lots of use cases, lots of interesting reasons why folks might want to adopt this tool. And Gerald, who helped create it, is here to tell us about how it works and what it does.
So Gerald, just to kick this off, I think we're all familiar with Wireshark, but what is Stratoshark?
Stratoshark is a sibling application to Wireshark, meaning that it shares a lot of the same code and it looks very similar, but instead of focusing on analyzing network traffic and packets, it focuses on analyzing system calls and log messages and lets you kind of interactively analyze and browse that domain instead of the networking domain.
So I'm assuming we're talking about stuff on platforms. So on machines, on systems in the cloud, as opposed to like networking devices.
Yeah.
So can you just kind of give us some background on what system calls are and what's the value? Why would I want to capture them? Why would I want to analyze them?
Sure. System calls, for the purposes of the way I've been describing Stratoshark, is that system calls can be thought of as the boundary layer between your operating system and the programs that run on the operating system. So anytime your web browser, your command line shell, or audio player, or whatever needs to do anything interesting, they go through the system call layer in their system. And that could be accessing a file or connecting something on the network or playing a sound or video or what have you. And so if you're a networking person, you can look at this boundary layer and say, look, that kind of looks like a network segment. There's all this interesting activity happening there. So if we can kind of tap that and pull that information out, we have this rich source of information we can use to kind of characterize what's happening on the system.
Yeah, I guess my understanding is like the operating system is the mediator between the programs and the hardware resources on a machine, and the way the programs interact with the OS is through these system calls, yes?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to get down into the weeds, you technically don't have to do it that way. I mean, you can have this little teeny embedded system with just bare programs running on it. But, most modern systems that people use for day-to-day tasks have an operating system that have programs running on that. And there's this system call layer that, as you said, is kind of the mediator between the programs and the system itself. That's true on Linux, on Mac OS, Windows, and any other operating system that you might be using.
What do those system calls tell us? Like, what are we looking for there?
They show, what the program's doing. A simple example is if, say, I'm on my computer and I run the curl command line utility and just get a file from the web. There's all sorts of stuff that has to happen there. The curl program starts up, it starts loading all of its dynamic libraries, it pulls in certificates, for certificate authorities so that it can properly secure these HTTPS connections. It has to do a DNS lookup, so it's going to go through this call layer to do that. It's going to make the actual connection to the website that you're requesting. It's going to go through the syscall layer to do that. Then it's going to save the file out to disk typically, and it will go through the syscall layer to do that. So, just this little simple example of running curl and getting a file, there's all this activity going on. And if you start from there and then go to more complicated applications, you can see what they're doing. And if maybe they're compromised, you can see where that compromise is happening. If there's a lateral movement, where a program shouldn't be reading your password file, but it is, you can see that activity and things like that.
So the general idea is there are things that you would expect a program to do and you can monitor them via system calls, but it could also tell you there are things maybe you weren't expecting a program to do.
Yeah, we did our first public release of Stratoshark back in January, and I was one of the people who typically do packet instruction. He does it for a living. I was kind of walking him through Stratoshark because he was interested in seeing how it worked. And he had said this little scenario with, he set up Apache on one side and I think curl on the other, and was just seeing what they were doing, through at the system call level. And he brought up this trace and he said, okay, what's this? And I said, well, that's the system call. It's opening a file. And he said, well, okay, why is it statting this file before? Stat is a system call that lets you, instead of opening a file, see all its statistics, like its ownership and how big it is, and then where it is on the system, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Apache process was statting all these different files. And he asked why it was doing that. And I said, I don't know. And I don't know if the Apache authors know. I mean, people, application developers don't look at how their applications behave on this level. I mean, they just write the code and get it compiled and ship it out and go. But one of the things that at least I'm hoping Stratoshark will be useful for is at this level, people can see how their applications behave. And I'm sure like Wireshark, I don't look at Wireshark on this level usually, but I'm looking forward to doing that so that I can see, okay, why is Wireshark statting these 18 files before it goes and does this task? Maybe we shouldn't be doing that. And maybe that's a bug we need to fix.
Because app developers be like, okay, it ran and it didn't fall apart this time, package it up and ship it out.
Yep. Toss it over the wall, go to the next task.
Yeah, get it out before something else breaks.
Yeah, I grabbed these libraries, not really sure what they do, but here you go.
Yeah.
It's running.
So it sounds like there's a security component of, what is this thing doing and calling, and should it be doing that and accessing these whatever applications, stores, credentials, etc. But there's also probably a performance analysis component here of, is this thing operating as streamlined as it could be, or is it reiterating and kind of regurgitating through things 10 times over?
Yeah. And you see that on both sides, both of Stratoshark and Wireshark. Wireshark is popular in the network analysis field, but it's also popular in the security field because there are characteristics of a system that kind of go hand in hand. You want it to be fast and reliable, and you want it to be secure. But in order to ensure that, you have to look at the same data and look at it in much the same way. And I think that same thing is going to happen with Stratoshark, with people looking at how applications behave.
So before we get into more details, I just want to get a sense of where I can run Stratoshark, what operating systems it works with.
Right now, Stratoshark runs on macOS and Windows and Linux, and we have official packages that you can download from stratoshark.org for Windows and macOS. And getting it on Linux, I'm hoping that the various Linux distributions kind of pick it up, but that hasn't happened quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's in progress for Debian and Ubuntu. I'm not sure about other operating systems.
Okay, so Canonical Linux, you've got it, and you're anticipating that the other flavors will pick it up.
Yeah, that's my hope. And if anybody's listening that actually works on that for various Linux distributions, just get in touch and I can help in any way I can.
Was Stratoshark designed to be used on-prem or in the cloud, or does it matter?
It's an interactive tool, so it's designed to run on your desktop. And so that means we need to pull data from somewhere. And we pull that data typically from Stratoshark makes use of these two libraries called libsync and libscap. Libscap sits on a Linux kernel and pulls in the actual system call data, and libsync then enriches that data. It will take things like user IDs and attach a username and a file descriptor and attach useful information to that, like the file system path or the network connection information and things like that. There are two other primary applications that use these two libraries. One is called Sysdig, which is the same name as the company that I work for, and another one is Falco. Falco is pretty popular in the cloud world. It works like an IDS. So it will sit there and run on your system and just pull in syscalls continuously and match those against a set of rules. And if anything interesting or suspicious is going on, it'll trigger an alert. And it does a really good job at that. But at that point, okay, you have this alert, you have this system call data. If you need to do any sort of kind of deep analysis, you can take that and then hand that off to Stratoshark. At least that's the idea we're going for.
Okay, so the idea is I would be running Stratoshark locally on my machine, and whatever machine's system calls I wanted to analyze, I would need to run Sysdig or Falco to do the system call capture, and then it exports that to my Stratoshark. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, you can pull it in a number of different ways. I mean, you can just pull a capture file down, or Stratoshark ships with a little utility called SSHdig, which will let you connect to a remote host over SSH and run sysdig on the remote host and pull in live capture data. The libraries that they use also have a plugin interface, and so you can pull in, along with system calls, you can pull in log messages from, say, CloudTrail or GCP audit logs or Kubernetes audit logs, and look at how your system is running on a much higher level. So if you're familiar with AWS, AWS provides this logging infrastructure called CloudTrail that lets you see, okay, somebody spun up an EC2 instance here, or they opened up an S3 bucket over here. And you can see just across your entire AWS installation, see how things are happening at a very high level. And Stratoshark can analyze those logs.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I do need a tool to capture the system calls, and that tool is separate from Stratoshark?
Yes and no. If you're running on Windows and Mac OS, we don't support local capture on those operating systems. If you're running Stratoshark on Linux, you can do local capture. But yeah, otherwise, if you're running on Windows or Mac OS, which most people are, you're going to have to pull in that data remotely somehow from a Linux machine.
And that makes sense based on what I think I understood from my self-education with the internet leading up to this call, which is that there is that library that's a capture library that feeds into kind of like an inspection decoding library, and then Stratoshark would sit kind of on top of that and be fed by that chain going down into the OS kernel.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm working under the assumption, and the intent is to have local capture on Windows and Mac OS at some point. I just don't know when that's going to happen.
Well, and you guys, I'm guessing this is still under the same, Wireshark Foundation, where this is a community effort supported, where there's not a corporate entity who's being paid for this work at this point. Is that the case? We're working with volunteers?
Mostly true. I mean, I do work for Sysdig, and I do work on Stratoshark as part of my day job, and there's work being done, by me in that regard. But yeah, as you said, it's very much also a community effort. We do, much like Wireshark, we do have this developer community that can make contributions to this tool and improvement, and that's one of the cool things that I love about working with Wireshark and that I'm anticipating with Stratoshark is that over the years, people always ask me, okay, what's the next big thing for Wireshark? And the answer that I usually have is I don't know, because this is a community-driven sort of thing, and the community is always surprising me with these amazing features that people think of and contribute back. One of the examples is, many years ago, if you use Wireshark, one of the cool features is that you can follow a TCP stream. You can right-click on a packet and immediately bring up a window that shows you the stream, all the data in the stream associated with that packet. And I didn't think of that. Some other developer just out of the blue contributed this code, and suddenly we had this great feature that people use all the time.
So you're anticipating a similar sort of development style for Stratoshark, that the community will contribute new ideas and new features?
Yeah. Part of my job is to facilitate that and make sure that people can do that with ease.
So if you want to see a Windows native edition of this, you need to contact Gerald and volunteer or grab a friend and get an effort going.
Yeah. To be specific on that point, Windows does have this facility called ETW, Event Tracing for Windows, and that potential path is there. It's just a matter of sitting down and looking at all the ETW documentation and writing the appropriate code and bringing in those events.
Okay, so you wouldn't have to start from scratch if you were looking to incorporate Windows into this.
Yeah, actually, Windows also supports something called eBPF, which is something that came out of the Linux kernel that lets you write these little bits of code that kind of run inside the kernel that pull out information as well. So, I mean, that's another path that we could take. So,
Oh, I didn't know Windows supported that. Okay.
I don't know how production ready it is, but it's something that people are working on.
So is the idea that Stratoshark could run inside of eBPF inside Windows? And that's how you would get that?
The capture mechanism. I mean, one of the ways that we can capture on Linux is for libscap to insert this little ePBF probe and then gather the data that way. It's like putting a tap on a network, basically.
Mhm.
The potential here on the Windows side is that we'd be able to do something similar.
Run libscap inside of eBPF on a Windows platform. Okay.
Okay, I'm about to show my ignorance with this, but with that sort of a component in the eBPF, you can also get access to certain network packets going in and out as well, too. So do you foresee some convergence of Wireshark and Stratoshark having some weird love child?
Since you bring that up, no, this is something that we discussed quite a bit early on in the development of the application. The kind of secret sauce here is that, if you use Wireshark, you're probably familiar with the PCAP-NG file format,
Yeah.
which lets you save packets. PCAP-NG is this really open and extensible, basically logging format. You can put in not only packets, you can put in all sorts of other information. For instance, one of the cool features of Wireshark is that if you do any sort of TLS decryption, you can insert the decryption keys into your PCAP-NG file so that you don't have to have this separate file with your keys. You can just kind of pass this capture file around and then people can decrypt that data. But there's all sorts of other information you can shove in there. You can put in comments, you can put in, I'll go into the weeds here, but
Weeds. We love weeds.
okay, fine. I was talking with Mike Kershaw, the developer of Kismet, a while back. One of the things he's been working on lately is gathering environmental radiation data, like
Oh.
Geiger counter stuff.
Wow.
But that's something that you can shove into a PCAP-NG file. You just come up with your own custom block format and shove that data in there. And at that point, it's just data that you log into this file. But kind of getting back to the system call side, the thing people kind of don't know is that SCAP, the system call capture files that Sysdig and Falco and Stratoshark use, those are PCAP-NG files. It's the same sort of overall file structure. So
Okay.
you could potentially have this capture file with packets and system calls and, well, background radiation data, stuff like that, and view them in the same application. The reason we kind of split it out into two separate applications is because if you look at Wireshark, it's this fully mature protocol analyzer with all these different features that focus on analyzing network data, including a whole bunch of menu items and dialogues and analysis windows and things like that. And so I kind of want to have this greenfield area that would allow people to develop features that focused on system calls. So I kind of split that out into a separate application with this kind of wide open space that people can kind of play in, and developers can play in and add features that way.
And it makes sense to me as a user because, I'm good with Wireshark, happy there. I don't work on application platform side at all. So even like looking at the videos, you guys have some awesome introductory videos on the website. But just like watching the videos, I would be completely lost if I picked up Stratoshark and started just clicking around and trying to figure out how to use it. So if you assume that most of your user population is either very familiar with, the networking side, or they're familiar with the side that Stratoshark is going to be feeding, and then you start to shove those things together and cram them, you end up with like this interface that everybody's confused about, and there's just crap everywhere that we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of wanted to avoid that. But one of the potential benefits here is that, as you point out, at a large organization, you have these separate systems teams and networking teams. But if you have these tools that have kind of the same basic foundation and the same filtering engine like Stratoshark and Wireshark do, they can kind of compare notes and say, well, I can drill down really quickly and get data this way if I, set up this menu bar or this toolbar filter and do this, and kind of pass that knowledge on to the team on the other side of the wall and help each other work more effectively. At least that's kind of a hope that I have.
Hey everybody, just a quick break to tell you about today's sponsor, NordLayer. Securing remote access is easy with NordLayer. NordLayer combines VPN, access control, and threat protection in one easy-to-use platform. With NordLayer, your users get secure remote access while you get to enforce control over who accesses what, from where, on which device. NordLayer works across Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, and Linux, so you can support all kinds of end-user devices while still meeting compliance and security requirements. NordLayer offers granular access, encryption, VPN usage monitoring, device posture security, identity and access management, and threat protection. NordLayer is powered by the NordLynx VPN protocol, which itself is based on WireGuard, a fast, efficient protocol for building encrypted tunnels. NordLayer is toggle ready with no hardware and no complex setup to get users up and connected. You can find out more at nordlayer.com/protector. And here's an exclusive offer for Packet Protector listeners. Get up to 22% off NordLayer yearly plans when you sign up, plus get an additional 10% off when you use the coupon code PROTECTOR-10. That's the word protector, a dash, and the number 10. Go to nordlayer.com/protector and use the code PROTECTOR-10. And now, back to the podcast. So did you develop Stratoshark with the idea that this would be something that network engineers could slowly adopt and learn and start to use and get value from? Or were you more thinking about application developers or security folks who need to understand how applications are interacting with an operating system?
Well, I mean, I'm going to give the dumb answers here and say I want everybody to use it, but I do.
Sure, that's fair.
If you're a network engineer and you're familiar with Wireshark, this interface is going to look really familiar and you're going to be able to move around in it pretty easily and pretty quickly.
Even if the output makes zero sense to you, you'll be in a familiar environment.
Exactly, yeah. When you pull up Stratoshark and pull up a capture, as a network engineer, the first thing you're going to notice is, wait a minute, those are not packets. There's no source address. There's no destination address. There's no protocol field here. What's this syscall name field and what does this do? But at a very basic level, you're looking at this series of events that happen over time, whether they're packets or system calls or log messages or what have you. And you can kind of analyze that data using very similar workflows.
Okay.
I have to ask this question before we get too far along and I forget, because the listeners need to know this. Is it SCAP or SCAP?
I don't know. I've heard both.
Because I swear if I hear like ACLs one more time, I'm just going to start like punching walls and things.
I tend to use the term SCAP, but I'm not going to make a big fuss if anybody else says it's SCAP.
There will be no public stonings for other uses. Okay.
Well, for some of the older listeners, I mean, they'll remember that Wireshark used to be named Ethereal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And Ethereal does have a definite dictionary definition pronunciation. And so we were kind of adamant about pronouncing it correctly there. But
it was kind of like the whole, GIF, GIF argument, the whole
Yeah.
ethereal, because I think everybody wanted to take ether like Ethernet and turn it into ethereal. And that was how they would say it. And then, of course, those of us that knew how it was meant to be pronounced would say ethereal. And it was this constant internet battle for probably a decade.
Yeah. Well, that battle's gone now. So
Yeah, that's right.
we have a new one. It's SCAP versus SCAP. So
Yeah.
And it sounds like JJ is willing to throw hands if you say SCAP in front of her. So just be
No.
forewarned.
I don't have a dog in this fight.
all right.
Yeah, okay. So because we're dealing with system calls, are they like logs just sort of generally captured and stored that I don't need to be running a system call capture mechanism at a particular point in time if I want to see those system calls? Or is it I have to be running this if I know I'm going to want to analyze a set of system calls at a particular point in time? Is it real time or is it stored?
It's real time.
Okay.
The operating system executes those system calls and then it moves on to the next one.
But could you capture them? I mean, just like a PCAP, could you start, I'm air quoting, like start a capture over a period of time and then take that offline, I'm air quoting again, and analyze that after the fact?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's the common use case here. You would capture them using Sysdig or Falco, or if you're on a Linux machine, you can run Stratoshark locally and capture them there.
Okay. The rest of my question was if I am investigating an issue that's already happened and I hadn't been running system call capture, I'm SOL on that, right?
Well, yeah, it's like capturing network traffic
Okay.
or any other sort of event data.
Okay. It's not like logs. There's no repository where this has been stored for me unless I'm actually actively capturing.
I will say at the log level, like the CloudTrail level, CloudTrail is something that runs in your AWS environment. You just flip it on and start gathering those logs, and an AWS will capture those for as long as you want, and they'll bill you for it. But that's
It's like when you turn on debugging on networking equipment and you end up with like terabytes of crap somewhere.
yeah,
Okay. So the thrust is, though, I need to be actively running a system call capture if I want to look at those system calls. I can store them for later use, but I need to capture them in real time.
yeah.
Okay. Can I use this in a containerized environment?
Yes. In fact, that's at least on the Falco side, that's the way people typically run it. They run it in either a Kubernetes environment or a Dockerized environment in some sort of container. You have to set up the container in a special way so that it can get to the data that it needs. Like on Linux, there's this file system called /proc that gives you all the information about processes. You need to expose that to the container. And of course, you need to be able to get into the kernel and get those system calls themselves. But yeah, you can run it inside a container and deploy it as however you want, like a sidecar or just even on a bare Linux host or however you want to do it.
How about VMs? If I'm running a typical VM, can I use this?
You would have to be running inside the VM. And people have asked about this. If you ran, say, Sysdig, or if you captured system calls on your VM host, on the host side, you're going to see network activity and you're going to see file system activity, but it's not really going to be easy to associate it with a process running inside the VM. I mentioned earlier that the developers come up with these surprising solutions, and maybe this will happen here. But right now, that's just kind of a faraway dream. Let me put it that way. What you wouldn't be able to see is, say, inter-process communication. On a VM host side, you're not going to be able to see inter-process communication on the guest side between two processes. Whereas if you ran a system call capture on the guest side, you would be able to see that.
Okay, got it.
Now, I have a quick question. Can you give us like the one-liner of what is, because I've heard you mention Falco and Sysdig. What are those two organizations or companies?
To disambiguate things here, I work for a company called Sysdig. Sysdig makes cloud security solutions and products. There's also this little command line utility called Sysdig, which kind of kicked everything off. But along with Sysdig, there is this tool called Falco that works like an IDS, but it runs on your host and analyzes system calls instead of network packets.
Okay. And are those products? Are they open source tools?
Those are open source tools.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
So if I'm a network engineer, I've used Wireshark, I'm comfortable with it, and this Stratoshark sounds interesting to me. Is there an environment or an application or a set of programs that might be most fruitful for me to start with playing around with Stratoshark? And what would I be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to get started, if you have a Linux VM or anything like that somewhere, the easiest way to get started would be to just get Sysdig installed, the command line utility, and then do a system call capture, pull that capture back to your local machine, and just bring it up under Stratoshark.
Okay.
And we do have some sample captures on the Stratoshark website, I think on the wiki. So, you don't even have to do that live capture. You can just pull down a kind of a canned capture and look at it, inspect it that way.
So we mentioned there's security use cases, there are performance use cases. Are there other things I could use this for?
Something that I think is really cool on the Wireshark side is that it's used for education. Something I hear all the time is, yeah, when I took a networking class in college, I used Wireshark, and I feel old and crumble to dust. But at the same time, I'm encouraged by this because people find this useful enough to use it as an educational tool. And I'm hoping that the same thing will happen with Stratoshark. That if you teach a university course on operating systems, you can say, okay, look, we can see how this system is actually behaving, and how these system calls are being used by these applications.
Is there a way, like a mental model that might be helpful for network engineers who are looking now at system calls? You mentioned, you're not going to see addresses, you're not going to see ports, but there may be something that you can sort of hook into mentally as like, oh, okay, I can get a sense of what's going on here.
If you look at Wireshark's, you know how a little kid does a deep knowledge dive into something, then they want to tell you all about that thing, like whether it's dinosaurs or state trivia. Like, some little kid will say, well, Missouri's state capital is Jefferson City, and its nickname is the Show Me State. And it's one of two states that, share a bear on the flag with California. Wireshark is just like that. And Stratoshark is just like that. But instead of telling you all about a state or a dinosaur or something like that, Wireshark tells you all about a network packet. Its core job is to pull as much information out of that packet, or the Stratoshark side out of the system call, and tell you as much as it can. And what we do on the application side is just layer features on top of that kind of make that deluge of information accessible and manageable and usable.
Mhm. Okay. So be prepared to spend some time with that very bright and very interested child of Stratoshark
Exactly. Yeah.
and getting maybe more than you wanted, but prepare yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, as somebody who, again, who doesn't really work in this space, and I don't know what system calls look like and what they do and what they're supposed to look like. I'm just curious, have you seen, just throughout your career while you've been developing this product, have you seen anything interesting or unexpected while looking at this information?
One of the examples was, like when I was helping, my friend look at Apache server system calls, just the fact that it used the stat system call to check on all these logs that it was saving out, just to make sure, I guess, that those files existed and that it could write to them. Just a little behavior like that. And, as somebody who's been in computing for a while, I think I have a pretty good idea of how an application does its job, especially as a software developer. But when I actually run an application and capture its system calls, when I look at that activity on that level, I'm kind of surprised at all the extra stuff that has to happen before even the little curl command line utility can connect to a web server. It has to do all this stuff up front. It has to load up, these certificate authority certs. It has to load up all these dynamic libraries. It has to pull in all this information that has to get going just before it can even open a network connection. And that was kind of a surprise to me.
Could I use Stratoshark to try to help me figure out if a host has been compromised in some way by malware, by a malicious act, or even by a rootkit?
Yeah, that's one of the primary use cases we're going for. That's what Sysdig focuses on as a company.
Mhm.
We help our clients with the cloud security, and Falco is one of the tools that helps with that. But Falco is great at what it does. It's a really good tool, but it alerts you. Once that alert comes in, you kind of have to do a deeper analysis to figure out what actually happened, and that's where Stratoshark comes in. It's more of a forensic analysis tool, much like you would pair an IDS with Wireshark.
That's just what I was thinking. Yeah, the IDS alert comes in and then you go do the packet capture and see what's happening.
Yeah.
So from like an SBOM, software bill of materials, and understanding which, applications are pulling which libraries or leveraging, which other features or kind of open source code, would digging into some of what Stratoshark would be able to show, like, would you be able to see that?
Yeah, yeah. If you can capture a program as it starts up and then as it runs, you can see pretty easily just by applying this filter and saying, okay, show me all the activity in the /lib directory on my Linux system.
Okay.
You can see all these applications loading all these dynamic libraries and loading in all this data.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation, I guess, yesterday about the new Erlang OTP SSH vulnerability, and it's like a severity 10, and apparently it's, on all sorts of industrial, systems in addition to some other applications. And, one of the questions was just like when Log4j came, how do we know which systems might be running this? Because you can't always just willy-nilly do, like nmap scans across your OT environment. So, actually getting into platforms and doing something a little less aggressive and look for these libraries would have been cool.
Yeah, you have to keep in mind this is a passive thing. It's going to show you what's happening as it happens.
Right. But if the idea is I need to find the devices that I need to then go patch
Yeah.
and see where this is being used in my environment, then this sounds like it could be an interesting way to do that if you need to dig into a system.
Yeah.
So, Gerald, a couple more questions before we let you go. The Shark Fest, which is the annual conference for Wireshark, is coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Sure. The next Shark Fest is in Richmond, Virginia from June 14th to the 19th. And if you're not familiar with Shark Fest, it's a conference for Wireshark developers and users. And it's where we bring our community together to kind of meet in person and exchange ideas and learn from each other. I love it because I work from home. And so the only contact I have with the Wireshark community is online.
Uh,
But it's really useful for me, at least, to interact with everyone and see how people use Wireshark and see how we can kind of maybe improve it to fit whatever environment and workflow that they have. But for a regular attendee, it's great because we have all sorts of instructors that can teach you how to analyze your network a lot more effectively and to use Wireshark more effectively.
I was just looking at the agenda here. So it looks like the whole thing is 6 days. It looks like there's 3 days of conference and 3 days with optional training. Some of those are 1 day and some of those are 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up like a lot of conferences are. We have our main conference with tracks for beginners and intermediate and expert users. But prior to the conference, we have these pre-conference classes that, if you're just brand new to protocol analysis and Wireshark, you can get up to speed and get the most out of, the main conference itself. And this year, our main keynote speaker is Vint Cerf. And so
Oh.
you should really attend.
That's worth the price of admission right there.
Oh, it is. And Vint is such a wonderful person. He's been able to speak at a couple of Shark Fests in the past, and it is going to be really great to have him there. No, but that's the thing. One of the things about our industry is that our pioneers are still around, and you can talk to them and see them. And this is a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I just have to call out a few of the things I see on the agenda because I think not looking at the agenda, I would think, oh, okay, it's a big conference about Wireshark. Maybe I don't need to do that. But there's AI-powered natural language interaction with packet captures, stuff on post-quantum encryption. I just saw something neat about exploiting IPv4 with IPv6. There's troubleshooting in the power grid. And that was just all on the first day, and there's 3 days. So
Yeah.
there's Wi-Fi stuff. There's 3GPP cellular stuff. I see Scott Raban speaking up there. So it looks like just a fantastic breath for network engineers to check this out.
Yeah, and we have evening events to kind of keep the audience engaged. We have different events like competitions to kind of help you up your analysis game, let me put it that way. There's a session called the Packet Doctors, which people just bring in packet captures and, we'll have 2 or 3 or 4 people just very quickly go through. Maybe they won't fix the problem the person is having. Usually they do. But the cool thing about it is you can see somebody who is really at the top of their game and see how they work. And they will talk through the process that they're using to analyze this network trace. And it is really beneficial to the attendees.
That's cool. I'm imagining someone running in with like one of those coolers they carry organs in for transplant. Like, take a look at this, please. And then I got to get on a plane. Are there going to be any tracks or education around Stratoshark at the conference?
Yeah, we'll have a couple of sessions there. We're still early days on Stratoshark, but yeah, we are going to have sessions on it. So if you are interested in Stratoshark, you can learn about it there. And we'll probably expand that as time goes on.
And outside of the conference, if folks are just interested in Stratoshark and want to, read about it, learn up on it, where should they go?
We have a website called stratoshark.org. Also, just the general Wireshark support channels like our mailing lists and our question and answer site and our Discord server and so on. We have areas where you can ask about Stratoshark there.
Okay. That is stratoshark.org, STRATO, and then shark, SHARK.org. Gerald, thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation, and Stratoshark sounds like a very useful, neat tool. So if this says wet your whistle, go to stratoshark.org and check it out. As always, thank you for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If you've got a topic you want us to cover, you can find JJ and I on LinkedIn or at packetpushers.net/community, where we have a free Slack channel with other IT and security pros. If you have a comment, a correction, or a question, reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. We do love that follow-up. We appreciate when listeners reach out. As always, stay safe out there.